Hey, what is up, mortals? It is AC here, and before we get into today's video, there is something I'd like to say. I'd like to let you all know that we have a merch store. Some of the items in it are only available for a limited amount of time, so if you're interested, go into the description box below and check it out. Each purchase helps us make more content. Secondly, if this video hits 300 likes by the end of the week, we will continue this what if. Thirdly, if you didn't know, only 41.3% of you guys are subscribed to us, so please hit that subscribe button and click the bell icon. Now, with that out of the way, let's get into the story. Even while waiting for his acceptance letter from UA, Izuku made sure to keep following the training regimen All Might had given him to the best of his ability. Dagobah had already been cleaned, but his own weighted marbles proved a decent way to stay in shape, and staying in shape had never been as important as it was now. With One For All now coursing through his veins like liquefied power, coming to his aid with the weakest of calls and a rush of adrenaline that felt simultaneously exhilarating and sobering, his status as All Might's successor had never felt as heavy. But even if that was true, he felt accomplished, and he felt that way because, for the first time in his life, he had done it. Izuku had grasped his dream, even if for a second. With his own two hands, he saved that girl. He made a difference, a positive change. For a second, he had been a hero, just like his idol, and the feeling of having done that was almost intoxicating. But Izuku knew how to keep his cool. So, when faced with weeks of worrying his results, the green-haired youth did what he did best. He trained and honed his body, and above all else, he tried his damnedest to think about anything but the letter from UA. So, needless to say, Midoriya could barely think about anything else. And that's probably why, when he vaguely heard his mother cry, "It's here!" from downstairs, while he'd been preparing in his room to go on his daily jog, the boy dropped everything he'd been doing and rushed to his mother's side, eyes wide and fingers trembling. Ingo stared back, holding the small disc between quivering hands, and they both sat hurriedly on the couch while Ingo placed the device on the table in front of them. The device stared back at them, unwaveringly and in complete silence. In a flash of light, a hologram burst into existence, and the silhouette of Izuku's mentor was quickly unveiled. All Might's smile was as intense as it had ever been, a shining beacon for everything a hero should represent. But at that moment, all it did was add to Izuku's nerves.
Can you see me?"
All Might asked awkwardly, waving a hand at their direction, and Izuku decided to hold in his tears for as long as he could. He watched, green eyes intent, as the illusion of his teacher revealed that he'd made over 50 points, a decidedly impressive score in his own words. He listened quietly as the hologram changed scenes, gasping when the pretty girl who had looked so terrified asked Present Might to give him some of her points. And he gripped the couch's fabric as tightly as he could as All Might described that he'd been awarded 60 rescue points for doing what he felt right. First place.
"Congratulations, my boy, and above all else, welcome to your Hero Academia."
Oh, who was he kidding? Izuku couldn't stop crying for 2 hours. He couldn't sleep that night. He turned around in his bed, restlessly changing positions and covering his body with layers of fabric to make himself comfortable, but his eagerness wouldn't fade. As if a spark had been released from his heart, each thought and mental scenario sent jolts of electricity across his body. Finally, before the sun could think of rising, he gave up, tossing his blanket aside like they were nothing and opening the window. The chirping of electricity was the only indication that One For All had been beckoned forwards before the boy leapt out the window and into the crisp streets of Mustafu, leaping from rooftop to rooftop in artistic blurs of emerald lights. He wasn't quirkless anymore, and illegal quirk usage could actually get him into trouble, especially when unsupervised. That wasn't enough to stop him, however, and he was in Dagobah Beach before he knew it. Landing at the pavement just before the beach itself, he let the energy of One For All dissipate from his body and mind, jade bolts fading from both view and senses alike. Finally, all was mercifully silent, and Izuku took a second to inhale the soft scent of the sea before taking off his shoes right then and there and walking into the beach itself. The sand was comfortably cold against his feet, and each step closer to the shoreline felt like a daring challenge made to the world itself. He stopped as soon as his toes touched the biting cold water, closing his eyes for a second or two and taking it in. It would most certainly be a really weird vision for anyone who happened to be walking by, he mirthfully mused to himself. A child in his pajamas, standing just at the line between the sea and sand at 2 a.m. He only heard the slightest indication of another's presence there, a very light step against the sand taken by boots. The person approached him from behind in silence, stopping a few feet away and to his right. Maybe he should have been surprised, but instead he felt at peace. He knew who it was, after all. It felt fitting, somehow. I probably should have expected to see you here. For a few seconds, only silence met his words. They were carried by the breeze, accompanied by the undeniable triumph that had permeated into the very essence of that place. The full moon in the skies only served to further illustrate the symbol of his success, a testament to his will not even the most bitter of skeptics could deny. You had no reason to expect me to show up at such an unreasonable time. In fact, I was under the impression that you should be asleep. Sir's reply was spoken softly, his tone gentler than Izuku expected from a man such as he. There wasn't much surprise in his tone either. He glanced over his shoulder briefly, but Sir was just outside of his vision, and all he could see were the edges of a gray suit. With a soft smile, Izuku shook his head and returned his gaze to where it belonged, beyond the horizon, on the lands his dreams resided in. He had a lot to ask him, of course. Sir had been a constant presence in his life for years, his only source of validation during times he'd have been steps away from despair. And for all those years, for all the effort Sir had surely put at him, Izuku had never quite managed to grasp the simplest of answers. Why? Why him? Why then? Why even bother doing any of what he did anyway? Late night? He settled for asking instead, and the words felt like cotton in his mouth. Once again they were met with silence for long, excruciating seconds. In a way, he paused as if searching for the right way to convey his thoughts. Finally, he continued on a stable, even tone, announcing facts as if the absolute truth. You've done marvelously on the entrance exam. I was impressed with the progress you made with One for All, and your showings were nothing to scoff at. Rescue points or otherwise, I was right to put my faith in you, it seems. Izuku didn't know much about Sir. He knew some of his likes, some of his pet peeves. He knew Sir was almost as much of a fan as All Might as Izuku himself was, and he knew he disliked bullies like Bakugo. Important things in their own way, of course, things that had helped him arrive at the conclusion that Sir could be trusted in full. And it certainly wasn't enough to wager a bet as to the man behind the cheap glasses. But something he did know about Sir, without any shadow of a doubt, was that he was a careful, meticulous man. No action was unplanned, no phrases were uttered without being put through rigid consideration. Thus, Izuku's mind traveled back to something that had been said during their first meeting, so long ago. You are permitted one question a week, as I will provide all information I deem relevant of my own accord. So do not thoughtlessly use it on something unimportant, such as my identity, because I won't tell you, Sir had said. It seemed as if Sir had changed his mind. Name-dropping One for All like that could never be an accident, not with someone as pragmatic as he knew Sir to be. Instead, the man was giving him a hint, throwing him a bone, so to speak, a reward for his performance during the entrance exam if he had a guess. He shook his head softly at that. The panic that had been welling up inside his chest had dissipated, and instead he resorted to Sir's meditation technique to gather his thoughts amidst the calming numbness that seemed to run through his veins. As he imagined the oxygen flowing through his veins, he resisted the urge to call upon the electrifying feeling of One for All, and instead parted his lips to speak softly. I already figured it out. Who you are, I mean. A week after I met All Might. Even if you didn't tell me their actual name, those marbles are not a very common weapon of choice. A hum of acknowledgement was all his statement drew from the man, who remained silent even when faced with something Izuku assumed would have shocked him. It certainly hadn't been an easy discovery. In fact, it hadn't occurred to him to look into Sir's identity before the man failed to inquire further as he stumbled to keep All Might's secret, as he'd always assumed he'd come up with nothing. The answer he'd been given then had been cryptic, purposefully kept short as to not give him too much to look into. But Izuku had always been one to overthink that, and he'd ended the day with one thing certain in his mind. Somehow, Sir knew about All Might. It wasn't hard to proceed from there. There wasn't that much about All Might's old sidekick on the internet anymore, but what little could be found by a surface-level research revealed enough. A man who could probably be around Sir's presumed age, and who had fought with weighted projectiles no other pros in the hero business used. A man who, logically speaking, would have known about All Might, and, when confronted by the tale of meeting the man, could have presumed the offer he'd been made. I suppose that was to be expected, Sir NightEye stated. His voice was even, almost in a monotone, and Izuku wondered for a second if the pro was speaking to him or to himself. Your analytical mind and fanboy tendencies were all you logically needed to be able to discern my true identity. Another pause. Don't worry, he assured the man. I won't tell anyone. Not even All Might. You would lie to your idol? Certainly he deserves to know. The question was somewhere between a test and a genuine question. He felt as if Sir was after an answer that would validate some theory of his. That was one of the things that made it weird to talk to NightEye. This insistence of his in sending mixed signals. To believe in him, yet expect him to come up short. You two are friends, right? I mean, you worked together for years. You're the one who's keeping things from him, and I think he should hear it from you. Even if I wish I could tell him, it wouldn't feel right. So I'll keep the secret, like I'm keeping One for All from my mom. The man let go of a short breath, as if he couldn't quite choose if he wanted to gasp softly or sigh fondly. The sound provided a stark contrast against the silence that their surroundings provided, and so even this light indication felt like a statement in and of itself. I see, the man muttered, running his fingers through his own hair slowly and releasing another breath. You are correct. When the time comes for him to hear about this, he should hear it from me. A heavy object thumped against the sand, the dull, muffled noise attracting Izuku's eyes to the spot behind him, where a yellow bag had been dropped next to him. Lifting his face, he and his first mentor met eyes for the first time in their lives, jade orbs meeting golden ones from across a few palms of empty space. It was the first time Izuku had truly seen Sir's face, and it was somehow exactly what he had expected. An angular face with sharp, strong features accompanying two eyes that seemed to lack a certain spark, but compensated for it in sheer intensity. Izuku walked to the bag in silence and grabbed it, lifting it with considerable difficulty. It was most likely the single densest object he'd ever laid hands upon, smaller than a microwave, yet as heavy as a truck. An open spot in the bag revealed it to be chock full of marbles and stamps, the projectiles he'd been trained to use. But these were green instead of white, bearing the same colors as his own locks of hair. You've excelled in every step of your training so far, Izuku, but the true challenge starts now. I'm sure UA's sport development is more than capable enough to design projectiles for you alongside your costume, but I thought you'd appreciate these instead. Consider it one last gift from me for coming as far as you have. A pause was taken after that. Sir NightEye pondered over his next words for a few seconds. And one last thing, Midoriya. In this world, there are two kinds of power someone can have. Power they were given, like a quirk or natural talent, and power they earned. Yours, like that of another apprentice of mine, is of the second category. This is an ability you conquered, not one that was bequeathed unto you out of pity, and it is your responsibility to make it your own. Though his words were of encouragement, he appeared reluctant to share them. It felt like a compliment, but not quite there. Even still, however, Midoriya grinned at the pro-hero brightly, putting the bag of projectiles on his back. There wasn't anything else to be said. After all, Sir had already said all that needed to be said. They would certainly meet again. Before we get back into the story, I would like to say that we've got a second channel called Anime Deep Dive. Anime Deep Dive goes over the hard facts of the anime presented. Now, in case you guys didn't know, we have a third channel called Anime Theory. Anime Theory mainly focuses on a large variety of mind-boggling anime theories. If you are interested in content like this, please go check the description below or click the eye icon in the top right corner. Now, with that out of the way, let's get back into the story. Eventually, the first day of school arrived, and with it came a whole new stage in his life. Izuku stood for almost 10 minutes staring at himself in the mirror before leaving, eyes locked with the gray uniform he'd associated with his dream for so long. He, useless Deku, had gotten into UA. It had felt amazing for the whole way there, and then suddenly anything but amazing as he finally reached the door to Class 1A. It was a colorful one, larger than his own short stature by at least 50 centimeters, and despite his resolve to face this new period of his life with the same calm and collected style he'd admired in Sir, he couldn't help but panic a bit. Beyond that door were the country's best. Each and every single student in there had proven themselves worthy, working their asses off with quirks they'd had over a decade to get familiar with. Meanwhile, there he was, having taken first place thanks to a system he had no way of knowing even existed, and carrying only a few months of experience with the power he'd been entrusted. No, he muttered to himself. I worked my ass off to get here. I won't be intimidated by the best. I'll work to be better. Plus, maybe they're nice and... Izuku opened the door boldly, and prepared to meet his destiny with all of his might, and whatever conversation had been going on before his arrival was quickly silenced in favor of staring at him. There was a tall, strongly built boy with deep blue hair, whom Izuku recognized from the entrance exam, but he didn't matter right then. What mattered was Bakugo, who had been sitting smugly with his feet over his desk, and whose expression had immediately shifted. A pair of ferocious crimson pupils met unwavering emerald ones, and deafening silence filled the classroom for a second or two in time. Izuku could see it clear as day in that look. A look of utter disdain. A gaze that spoke of unbridled fury that oozed from a proud boy who had his pride challenged and maimed. Izuku wanted to flinch at that look. A small part of him, the one that was still 5 and laying bruised and battered on the playground floor after Kachan had his fun with him, wanted to run away before the pain came onto him. A larger part of him wanted to announce it to him, clear as day. I'm here. I won't stand back and let you pummel me anymore. Hello, I am Ina Tenya! Or, well, that could happen. Izuku focused back on the blue-haired boy with a shy, shaky smile, but his own gaze spoke of steel. Hello there. It's nice to meet you. I'm Midoriya Izuku. You were the one who scored first place then! Ida looked genuinely surprised at that revelation, as if Ida expected someone who's different from Izuku in every way imaginable, and his mental picture had just been broken. And the green-haired youth wondered for a second if he looked that unimpressive. Yes, but that was because of the rescue point system! You certainly realized that there was more to the exam than immediately met the eye. I must admit, as a student, you are far superior to me. No, that's not... Ida bowed deeply in an exaggeration of a traditional demonstration of respect, and for a second or two, Izuku found himself wanting to crawl into the darkest corner he could. Steps attracted his attention, however, and... You are the plain-looking kid from the exam! He was faced with the girl he'd saved from the zero-pointer. Compared to the distraught, panicked visage she'd carried, and that had been etched into his mind when he'd laid eyes upon her, the girl looked absolutely lively, with rosy cheeks and medium-sized brown locks. In fact, Izuku noticed, she was surprisingly pretty when not being crushed by rubble. Like, really pretty. The boy felt heat rushing to his cheeks at that thought and... Well, wait... Plain looking? What was it with people and thinking he looked unremarkable exactly? At some point during these conversations with a girl, who he quickly learned was called Uraraka Ochako, the classroom had gotten fuller and fuller. Students with all kinds of different appearances and personalities kept arriving from the grandiose gates that separated that land of future heroes from the world outside. If you're all here to make friends, you should just go home. A dry, barren voice called to his attention from the doorway behind him, and the young man quickly turned to rest his gaze upon whoever it was who had spoken to them. What met his eyes was, Hey, Uraraka-san, is it just me, or is that a giant caterpillar? It looks like a giant caterpillar, at least. Well, whoever it was had clearly listened to their comments if the long-suffered sigh that escaped his lips was anything to go by. The yellow bag the figure was enveloped in opened slowly, and from it emerged a man dressed in blacks and grays, and with the most lifeless gaze Izuku had ever seen. You're wasting precious time. It took you all 8 seconds to shut up. If you want to stay in the hero course, you'll have to do better than that. As the man spoke, Izuku noticed his eyes darting across the room at his own leisure, far livelier than he'd first realized. Though he did look a bit like a hobo, Izuku could tell just from that look that this man was a pro hero. Each student was carefully examined, even if for a second or two, during the brief moments in the silence that he got with the statement. I'm Shota Aizawa, your teacher, he drawled in a tired voice. Now put these on and let's get outside. After each student followed the depressive-looking pro outside, they were informed of what that was all about. A quirk assessment test on the first day of school. What about orientation? Won't we miss it? Uraraka protested, alarmed. If you really want to make it into the big leagues, you don't have time for that kind of pointless traditions. UA is different from the schools. We don't care about limiting people who are born distinguished. He turned to stare at them dead on, and his lips curled into a facsimile of a smile. It was wide, self-satisfied, and devoid of any signs of mercy. The Minister of Education is still pretending that all men are born equal, but eventually they'll understand. That was when Izuku understood. This man, this pro, wouldn't show them any mercy. But that was fine in the end. Even if it scared him, Izuku would face the challenge head-on. The man threw him a ball. Midoriya, you managed to get first place in the entrance exam despite your recklessness, didn't you? What was your farthest distance throw in softball? Bakugo's eyes focused intently on his back, Izuku realized. Instead of meeting them, he inhaled deeply. 51 meters, I think. He noticed it instantly. The way the man's eyes tightened in response to that, almost as if doubting his claim. Even still, however, he proceeded. Right. Why don't you try it again with your quirk? But if you break yourself for the sake of glory again, I'll expel you on the spot. Within his chest, the raging flames of One For All waited patiently to be called upon. Izuku nodded in silence, steeling his guts and quelling his panic before it could hinder his growth. Instead, he would lie to himself. He wasn't afraid. He was excited. Izuku held his head high as he walked to the circle. All right, readying himself to throw the ball. He stretched his arm backwards, closing his eyes for a second. 2 kinds of power. Those you're given? He had worked his ass off during training, both with All Might and with Sir. He had given his best in every task, trained until he fell every day. And he'd done so despite being told, each and every day, that he'd always be worthless. One For All answered his call immediately, and the ground under him gave in just a bit as emerald bioelectricity was willed into existence, emanating from his body with the same intensity he'd used to chase after his dream. With power permeating his body like a fire, Midoriya opened his eyes. And those you earn! And let the legacy he'd been entrusted mark its place in the future. The movement that threw the ball split the air, ripping a cloud of dust from the ground with strength alone. At the last second, he went beyond, 20% of One For All on the tip of his finger. For a single split moment, that power impacted the projectile, just before it was released from his grasp, and as a result, a shock wave of power rippled the very air around his body. Now moving as fast as a bullet, the ball parted clouds and air in its path upwards, and it kept going until he couldn't see it anymore. His finger was certainly injured, as he could feel hot pain coursing through it, but it wasn't broken. He could still move it. So, as the rest of 1A watched him with their mouths open, Izuku closed his hand into a fist, despite the droplets of blood that were now pressed against his palm, and smiled. Hey, Sensei. I can still fight. The grin that statement drew from the raven-haired man was the stuff of nightmares. You brat. Thank you all for watching the video to the end. Now there are a few more things that I'd like to go over before the video ends. On behalf of We the Celestials, I'd like to thank the writer of this video and editors for this video. Their details will be in the description. If you're a voice actor, editor, or writer, or you're interested in becoming one of those, go to the Discord that is in the description of this video and hit up the head of one of those areas. We're always looking for members to join us. That's it from us for today's video, so thank you all for watching, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you're interested, and hit that like button if you like the video. Until next time, peace out mortals, have a fantastic day!